to this session of the Schools of Tomorrow worldwide conference run by Beacon House Schools Group. My name is Maggie Atkinson and I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a member of the International Advisory Council at Beacon House, a former teacher, municipal administrator and Children's Commissioner for England, and I speak to you from Essex in southeast England. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of 4 experts based in a wide range of countries and doing great work with children, young people and families and in the wider community. And the topic for our session, which is in the inclusive strand of this conference, is parenting of the past, bridging the intergenerational gap. And all of these 4 have a great deal of expertise in and much to say about that very important topic for today's young people who will be tomorrow's parents. So I'm going to introduce my panelists by name and ask them to say just a little bit about what they do and what they bring to this session, and then we'll go. So I'm going to ask first of all for Dr. Faria Paracha to speak and tell us who she is and what she does. Over to you.
Paracha, and I have been living in Lahore now for some time. I'm a clinical and neuropsychologist, but I have been working in the field of PVE and CVE, which is preventing extremism and countering extremism in all kinds of thinking, not just violent extremism. And for now, that's it until we. Do you want me to continue with my? No.
That's
okay,
absolutely fine. Thank you for that introduction. And many of you will be wondering what that has to do with schools, but that's part of what we want
That
to
is,
talk
I'm working in schools.
So I'm also joined by Dr. Sarah Taylor, who, like me, is in the UK, and she will now say a little bit about who she is and what she does. Over to you, Sarah.
Hello everyone. I'm Dr. Sarah Taylor. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist in the UK, and I work primarily with children who what we would call have experienced developmental trauma. So primarily children who are unable to live with their parents because of some area of abuse or neglect. I'm also really particularly interested in children's overwhelming anxiety, and which has led me to develop what's called the calm brain approach, which is used in schools to basically calm children down and lower children's baselines. Is that okay, Maggie?
That's absolutely great. Thank you very much. I'm sure the audience is already excited, even after only 2 panelists have said what they do. So I'm going to come now to Mr. Mohammed Yassir Sadiq, who I know needs to be known as Yassir. So Yassir, your turn.
Thanks, Maggie. My name is Yasser. I'm based out of Dubai. I work for Philips as head of rewards for Middle East, Turkey, Africa, and Central East Europe. In addition to my corporate life, I'm quite interested to do some work in the area of mind sciences, trying to explore how the mind works and how this can actually be used to help the youth. And also, I come from an HR background in the corporate setting.
Thank you, Yassir. And our final panelist, but by no means least, is Omar Tassif, who's based in Australia. So we are worldwide. Over to you.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I'm very interested in human stories. I spend a large part of my day listening to people, and that's been the last 10 years of my life. And I share the wisdom of lots of human stories in this session.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited about our next 55 minutes or so together. We've been asked by the SOT organisers to look at how cultural and social setups in our countries, in our world, have affected family relationships over generations. And of course, there are educators on this call. So how does that come into school with the children who you teach? I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn to address that, but there are 2 other questions folded into that large overarching first question. Do we know where we can find the reasons for any intergenerational difficulties or conflicts that might arise? And together, how do we work to address those areas and make schools and communities into calm, creative, productive places for our children and young people and for those who love care for, nurture, and teach them. So we've got just under an hour to sort that out. I'm going to come first, please, to Faria and ask for your views. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I forgot to mention, I also have worked in the clinical field, private practice for 30 odd years. I have seen children from all walks of life and parents. And I would say that the greatest worry for me is what the media promotes in communication, which is in group of people who think similarly, and they just get reinforced and consolidated in their thinking patterns, and they want to join the club. The club gets bigger, but it's still congruent. There are no anyone who doesn't really adhere to whatever the ethos is doesn't belong to that group, so they edit them from their talk shows. The other thing that I think is detrimental right now to relationships is the timing. Children live as nocturnal animals. They stay up all night and they're awake during the day, and they hardly have any association of even, I would say 60-70% of the children do not even have meal times with their parents. So, I know growing up, one of the most important mediums was mealtime. You discussed and you fed yourself and you felt nourished and nurtured, not just by the food, but by the interaction. Parents are very frustrated about that he's not there during dinner time, he goes very early to school, lunches at school, when do we see our child? And then the kind of demands the school makes on their time, in terms of tuitions. We never had tuitions, but now children have to have those extra tuition, so they are again involved after school in those activities. There are hardly, except for holiday times, there are hardly any activities that the families um, share together. Um, I think it's not just intergenerational, it's also intragenerational, the conflict. Because the culture of the world that the children live in is not the world the parents know much about. And this, I think, is going to get worse. If we adhere to if we adhere to all the prophets of the future, like Ray Kurzweil or Winch, in another 20 years, 20-25 years, will be this huge singularity revolution. This is the second one after the Big Bang, where we may not have much control over the computers. The computers will devise new concepts, new thinking for themselves. They will increase our knowledge, surely, but there is also that world of emotional well being. How will that be addressed? And I think this technological big bang that will happen, it will happen when it will happen, will overturn the pillars of society as we know it today. Are we equipping our children to cope with that? Not just children, but the parents. Whereby all information, I think books are already over. Children don't even know how to hold a book and read. So I think we need to work on that. But for me, as the kind of work that I've been doing for the last 14 years in CVE and PVE, I think the vulnerability is enhanced when you only belong to congruent in groups. So are we in schools encouraging membership in other groups? For example, not just all Lahoris, all Muslims going to uh, Beacon House schools. I mean, Beacon House schools are great, but maybe it's not just intergroup. It's also people from different areas. I know schools make an effort, but these are the schools that can afford it, to have children travel and meet other children. But it's a very small minority, very, very small minority. Um, so I think 3 points. One is in-group, out-group dynamics must be, and one can teach that, by the way. This is what I'm working in schools right now. You can teach children the structure of thinking, not what to think, but how to think. Are we teaching children how to think or just what to think? Exams are important, but learning and knowledge is also important. So this I see integrative complexity methodology gives a very good uh, experiential learning program where children learn how to think. They are not assessed at all on what they think. I think this is an important variable that could be added in school and university. We're also working at universities curriculum, whereby the ability to integrate perspectives, to get out of the binary black and white, and achieve a grade that may not be all consonant, but you understand that there are other perspectives that you have to pull together, I think would be helpful. I feel personally that even MUN teaches you binary. You argue on 2 points, but I think we can just have a discussion on multiple viewpoints and teach children how to integrate the different perspectives and be comfortable with it, not feel insecure about it. I think for now, this is what I have to say. And yes, one more thing, the negative algorithms. If we're going to have these superhuman artificial intelligence computers that are going to build themselves, what are they going to build on? What we fed them. And what are we feeding computers today? What are we feeding them in all the communications, all the storage of information? I think it's very negative. It is not inclusive. It's not um, integrative. It's negative. And so I'm afraid that the artificial intelligence that's going to surge in the next 2 decades may be destructive. I fear. I hope I'm wrong. I would like to be proved wrong, but I won't be alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those introductory remarks. Many, many strands of issues that I know families and schools are likely to be grappling with their children and young people, I would hope, rather than doing unto them. Yes, sir, I know that you are an expert in neurolinguistic programming. I don't know whether you want to pick up on some of those threads and cast us into the solution finding part of our discussion, if you can. Over to you. Thank you. Mic's off when not speaking, please.
Thanks, Maggie. One thing I'd like to start off with is that I also have a very interesting situation as an individual, that I'm a father of 3, and their ages are very interesting. It's 5, 14, and 16. So that's why this topic is very, very close to my heart as well. One of the things that I'm always thinking is that what has really evolved over time is that this from linear way of communication, where we were only communicating maybe with parents, with few teachers around us, or few friends, to a social media, as Dr. Pracha was saying, the interaction has become exponential all of a sudden, and an experience and exposure to a lot of cultures, societies, perspectives all around us. What I feel has been missing in between is the value system that we have not been able to deliver to our children. That what values are important and why are they important, and that is creating a bit of an identity crisis for the children. So they have been exposed all of a sudden from one day to another, a world where they never thought that would exist, probably, right? And in between, there's this whole set of values that they're struggling to deal with, that what do I hold on to? Some of the times as parents, I also feel a bit responsible here, is that our communication style over the years has been inculcating those limiting beliefs in the minds of our youth, right? For example, you've got to be powerful to make a difference. Just a kind of a belief that, we over years, we've been trying to teach our children, and in not a very negative way. There's not a negative connotation with it, but that is why that I need to be something to make a change. I need to be beautiful to be heard, for example, right? So I think what has evolved is this exponential growth in the internet or the social media platforms, and our inability to really respond to that. What are we going to hold on to? So that for me is one of the biggest challenges that we face. And this whole, I think, direction around that, what I have learned from my experience is probably the only way of doing things, for example. And that has become an ask as well. Sometimes when we are in the corporate setting, when we are interviewing the young graduates, one of the things that we ask them is that we are not really interested to know what you can learn, but we would like to know what you can unlearn during the process. And that's also for me as well, because a lot of time the emphasis has always been given that we need to learn this, we need to equip with this knowledge, with this information. But what am I really willing to unlearn during this process? And a lot of new exploration comes out of this thinking process. Dr. Pracha also talked about that, this time, this me time has diminished in our day-to-day interaction with our children, with our youth, with people around us. I asked some of my clients specific on this topic that, whenever you have this relationship with time and you find difficulty, ask yourself just one question. Every time you fail, you think that you failed to do something that you had planned to, ask yourself, it was not important. Just run this statement in your head. I did not do this thing because it was not important. And immediately your mind will start actually giving you a lot of answers and results that, oh, do you really think that by not doing this, you could actually function? So what I'm saying is it's also about how we inculcate those values rather than saying what's right or what's wrong. Let the mind also kind of work in the child's head to get all those answers. My role as a father or my role as a coach is just to provide that platform where they can have that thinking going on rather than dictating what's right or what's wrong. So that's how I see this topic in terms of how this has evolved. I would say exponentially, out of proportion sometimes. And it is leading to an identity crisis amongst the youth.
Goodness me, I knew this was going to be a big topic, but we are in the world of life changing and model changing. And part of this, I think, is about both changing how we parent and changing how we expect our children who live in what I describe as almost a Venn diagram rather than a linear world, and how we change how we school them, because they bring that Venn diagram of their lives and the interconnectedness and the multi-complexities that Dr. Paracha was talking about earlier into school. They can't put it down at the door. Sarah, give us your thinking, please, because of the work that you do in helping to calm nervous systems and anxiety. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. I was just thinking what a rich conversation we're having. From my perspective, this topic of intergenerational experiences is very important because there's a correlation between that and what we're seeing globally, really, with the rise of anxiety, stress, and, well, especially in the UK, but I'm sure this is globally, mental health. And so for me, I'm very passionate about that because that's my day-to-day job. Until recently, historically, if we think about it, we have lived in these multi-generational, multi-family groups. And then that has changed. And I was trying to think about when that diversity has changed. But geographically, we're moving about, and that family system, that family structure has broken down. Now, the family and rich relationships between adults and children are vitally important because that is early experiences, and early experiences are the most important phase of anybody's life, because in that period, that is when the architecture and the structure and the organization of the brain happens. In fact, in the first 4 years of a child's life, 80% of the brain is already organized. So what we're talking about is things that we are looking at is being developed very, very early on. So when we talk about the behavior and the different styles of interacting that young people might be demonstrating, we've got to think about what we're doing societally to support that transition through time. And so what I would love is that welfare systems change to go around to more of a family situation, so that we're giving that input into the family in those early experiences. But as a clinical psychologist, what I do is I work with children with mental health. And what I realize through attachment theory, and I don't know if people are aware of this, but this is something that we really need to understand, is that relationships, rich, supportive, predictable, consistent relationships with supportive and caring adults, so that would be a parent or a grandparent or indeed teachers, is absolutely vital for a child because it regulates. And when I talk about regulation, I talk about calming children down. And what I pose to you is whether what we're seeing, because this intergenerational relationships has broken down, and now that we value isolation and privacy, actually as human beings, that's not how we operate. We operate in connection, being with each other, but actually our society is supporting that we come away from that. What are we seeing is the aftermath of that. These children are unable to regulate, calm themselves because their lower areas of their brain are completely stressed out. They're being stimulated by their environment. They're being stimulated by the things they're seeing, maybe in a school system. It might be more of a stressful environment about grades, achievement, a punitive possibly style of teaching, which all activates this lower area of the brain. And what we need is to think about calming that lower area of the brain. So the beautiful higher areas of the brain, the cortex, which is responsible for abstract thinking, creativity, spontaneity, ability to be reflective, mindful, that becomes opened up. So the lower brain becomes more calmer, more regulated, more stabilized, more anchoring. But I think what we're seeing is actually it's a top-down effect. You've got the higher cortex squashed down because of stress and anxiety, and you've got this lower brain, which is part of what is developed in early life, is too dominant and too activated.
Wow. Oma, you get the last spot in this segment, to both to try and reflect on what you've heard, but also to give us your take. And then I'm going to move us in the second half of this conversation towards, if we were the people with all the power and all the magic wands, what would the solutions look like for parents, for teachers, for schools, in the training system, you name it. So you have had warning. Oma, what are your thoughts?
So I'm imagining every generation is in some ways responding to a set of environmental challenges. So the baby boomers might have reacted to the excesses of the veterans and what they went through, and the Generation X responded to a series of challenges or excesses of the baby boomers, and the millennials then took after where the Generation X left. And I'm imagining that that's the flow of our lifespan, that every generation will be in some sort of a conflict with the previous one, or in some sort of a contextual response to what's happening with them. I'm imagining that what is happening right now with climate change, a whole generation would be responding to that, which the previous generation might have not had to consider. So I'm very interested in those contextual factors and what people are responding to, what meaning they're deriving from that, what conflict that produces within them, how that conflict is passed on to the systems, the family, the institutions, how the responses. But I know one thing in my work, which is that conflict is never the problem. The problem is not being able to cope with that problem. So the problem is not the problem is not dealing with the problem. So when we're unable to contain that conflict, we're unable to have a series of responses that might help different in-groups, out-groups, different groups, families, children, parents, child, different dyads, to speak with each other, to understand the meaning that they have given their own contextual factors. That's when something breaks down. That's when we're imagining that it even gets escalated. So a lot of, I think that in the past 15 years, what might have changed is the rate of technological distance between generations, and the rate of how different generations are responding to what they knew, and the data that's available to them, that might have become quite magnified in some ways. But in my mind, I'd always imagined that the generation that had access to radios, they might have heard from their parents saying that, well, look at these guys on their radios all the time. And the generation that had TVs, The previous generation might have said, well, we had the good old days where we just had radio, and look at you just being on your TV all day long. And now we're saying that to our kids, you're on your phones all day long. Whereas there will always be the impact of technology. There will be always the impact of, I don't know, the next generation might just have robotics and artificial intelligence around us. And the challenge is that how will we be coping with them? How can we keep those areas of communication open with them so that some common meaning can be derived? Because somewhere where we're always as meaning-making creatures, we're trying to understand the other, we're trying to coexist with them. And when that doesn't happen, like Sarah was saying, that sets into that very low road in our brain that compels us to be in that fight and flight response, where we will then be responding to the other as an enemy. We will be doing the us and them. We will be doing the in group and the out group, and that's where that conflict becomes something difficult. Whereas otherwise, conflict always exists, and there will be some conflict that will be even irresolvable, and that for me is not the problem. The problem is where we're not being able to talk about that, or the relational space contracts where between parents and children, they're unable to find those containers where conversations could happen, or they continue to break down. And I'm very interested in those sort of containers, that how can we bridge those narratives where people are listening to each other, where that communication doesn't break down in terms of contempt or criticism, and instead we can have those systems of empathic, attuned, gentler conversations where we're saying, okay, I'm interested in why are you doing what you're doing, or how does this work for you, or how did you sort of get to this place where you think this way? Because I don't know how someone can even get to this place or think in this way. And that's where we have a conversation. That's where it's relational, and relational can be very healing. It can be very powerful.
Colleagues, you've all four said some very important, I think, and very leading and sometimes actually almost seminal things between the four of you, who come from very different places and disciplines, but are, I think, let me just at the halfway point sum up a little bit. I think what you're talking about is each generation coming forward out of previous generations, which they may not understand, and the previous generation may not understand them, seek meaning in whatever the media, and I say that not just in terms of broadcast and print, but the media in which they spend their time, rather than seeking meaning with and from each other. And sometimes the need to engineer a space where that each other connectivity can be maintained, and where it's broken can be regained and strengthened, is, I think, where all four of you have been. How does the individual mind then interact with what's coming at it is part of that, but then how do we, as a contextualized society, and the microcosm of that society, which is the family and the school, adhere to the mission of keeping the connections? That there is a sense coming from all four of you, from your different perspectives, that that's where you think we are. That need not to drop the connectivity, that need not to be fearful of stepping into each other's spaces to make those connections real and working for the benefit of all. I would think that for many parents and teachers on this call, that's music to their ears, because that's their work with their children and with the children and young people that they teach and try and nurture and move forward. Let's move in then to that sense of how would we step into this space and make it worse, make it work, make it better. I'm going to come to Yaza first.
Thanks, Maggie. The starting point for me has always been this thought that what is my role as a parent, right? If I can define that very clearly, and sometimes it comes as a cliche that parenthood comes automatic to us, or it's natural. I think, like any other skills, this is also one of the acquired skills that we as parents need to really work on. So the first thing, what I feel is that as a parent, at least in my model of the world, there are two responsibilities that I need to bring to my children. One is unconditional love. Now, I want to explain that a little bit because it can be interpreted sometimes that means that, I adhere to anything and everything my child is coming back with. And then, there are no rules, there are no guidelines, there are no, so we're not talking about that. What I'm saying is my child needs to know that he or she has a very strong backing. Whatever happens around me, whatever I am going through, it is okay to show my vulnerability to my father or my mother, to my parents, or at least the people around me, right? That's what I mean that, this thought of having a safe haven around me is the first way of actually penetrating into a stronger relationship with my child. That's number one. Number two, what my role is also to give them and guide them about certain values which have worked and why those values are important and what is the cost of not doing those values. My role is not to really dictate that this is a better value than that value. With this exponential change that we've been talking about in the space of social media and media in general around us, I cannot fight anymore with this notion of controlling that, your screen time is only restricted to 4 hours, you can't do more than this, etc. It's about that if you are on a screen or you're interacting with people, how do you learn to coexist? How do you have concerns for others? What is freedom of expression and what is freedom of speech, right? What is the definition of beauty out there? Is it something that the Instagram or any other platform is giving me, or is it something the child is maybe going through some unaddressed traumas of the past, right? Which is causing that state in the child's mind of having this, I call them sometimes artificial expression of beauty, or how it is being expressed out there. So I think Omar also mentioned it's about equipping the child with that toolkit, if you like, in terms of addressing that by himself or by herself, rather than using a very policing attitude, if you like. Just to give you a bit of a context, because I also have this other corporate hat all the time, we as an organization, we are now exploring an idea in the organization that how can we tap into reverse mentoring. So the Gen Z that we are hiring sometimes, how can we actually learn from them? So these are some of the things that I think if we are open, and then again, I'm a great, in this idea of exploring that what can I unlearn? What has not been working for me, right? For example, I have grown in an environment in my childhood where avoiding conflict was one of the things that, you have to be respectful, you have to avoid conflict as much as possible. And that's what the new generation is completely working opposite to that. They like to have varied perspectives. They like to wade their way through those perspectives. But how well I am able to equip them to still carry on to what is important to them in their value system, in their belief system, but be receptive to different perspectives as well, in a very respectful manner, right? So that's what I would say to this, Maggie.
Thank you, Yasser. Wise words indeed. Faria, can I bring you in on the back of that? Because you clearly have done so much work with young people who have been living in what I think is mentally and emotionally dangerous spaces, in being radicalized in whatever way. How do you bring them into a new way of making those contextual links, making those life links that Yasser was just talking about?
Yes, thank you so much, Maggie. Very interesting. I will just come to that point in 1 minute. First of all, Sarah, what you talk about the limbic system and calming it, I think that is very important. And in all the IC workshops, the first thing we do is just that before they enact the roles of the different perspective. So I think enacting roles helps. Maggie, what was very interesting for me working in KPK, and that these children really thought I was way, way out of the out group. And it took very little for me to become part of their in group. Compassion, empathy, and trying to help them understand that I trying to understand why they did what they did. I'm not going to punish them, but help them to understand the situation, the narratives of the terrorist commanders differently in a wider perspective, and to get out of empathy into compassion. Empathy is still a small footprint. It's between you and me, but compassion is a larger footprint. And I think we need to, in fact, there's a very good book, Empathy Can Be Evil. It can be, because if I'm only going to think about myself or people like me who are in deep trouble, then I'm not going to go very far. I think what Yasser said about bridging, um, making bridges between generations with values that are common is so important. And unconditional love is something that I think we don't, in fact, even more than unconditional love, friendship. I am your friend. What does that mean? My supervisor, who was an amazing German lady, said to me one day that, Fialine, if you go to jail, I will not condone your behavior, but I'll be there for you. I'll go and visit you. So I think this is something we need to inculcate in our young, that we love you, we'll be there for you, but we're not going to condone certain behaviors. There's a difference there. I think that is a very important point that you brought up, Yasser. Um, Metacognition, from what Sarah was saying, is heart and mind. And I agree with you, the limbic system or the heart has to be calmer for cognition to take over. But first you have to work on the heart, and then you bring in the cognitive complexity. You help the young to understand that. And it is integration of both of that is which is going to promote metacognition, which is what we need to cope with the world at large. And heart and mind, both. So I don't know, but I think for me, compassion is extremely important, without which we will not bring in other in groups that are incongruent to be part of our in group. We won't be able to do that. To give you an example, if I see a picture of a Palestinian who's killed, a child, in the battle between Palestine and Israel, I feel empathetic. But if an Israeli child, picture of that, I feel compassion for that child also. I will not condone, in either case, war, ever. But to be able to feel compassion regardless of which side you're on is what may heal the world. Otherwise, we'll be drawing boundaries all over the place. I hope that's helpful.
That is profound, Faria. Thank you very much. The notion of healing the world through families and schools and communities walking into a space together where compassion is the expected norm. I don't agree with you, but I can see where you're coming from, and you are a fellow human being, and we are in this together. That the notion of unconditional regard in a schooling context for children and young people who are struggling is also very important and part of a
Yes,
big debate in this country, certainly.
yes.
Omar, can you come in?
Maggie,
I'm going
just
to
one question
bring
for
Sarah
you.
in as the fourth.
Since
Sorry,
you're
Faria.
Just one question for you. You're involved in, you're an expert, you're at the helm of education systems. How come Finland is doing so well with just 4 hours of teaching time and no homework?
That's a question that I would love to ask the entire English education system, which is utterly bound up in just work them harder models. Yeah,
Yeah. Even
Finland.
those kids,
Finland is a
I
model.
went to Finland. They're doing so well, and as far as integrative complexity is concerned, they were brilliant. So 4 hours of education, a lot of sports, and no homework.
I
I'm
couldn't
glad you
agree more.
agree.
I couldn't agree more. Omar, I know you're based in Australia, but I also know that you're international in the work that you do. What are your reflections on how we might, to pick up Faria's expression, almost heal the world?
One of my favorite quotations from Jung, that might encapsulate some of that, is that how the right way to wholeness is made of fateful detours and wrong turnings. There's this sense, and then over the years of my practicing that continues to guide the work I do, that sometimes as someone on the outside who wants to inspire that change, we have that sense of urgency, that immediacy, and the intent might be right, but that defies the way that change happens, which a lot of times is paradoxical in nature. And that's one of the guiding principles, the paradoxical nature of change, that sometimes change happens when you stop trying to make it happen. So it's more about holding that space where it can be looked at, we can circle around it, we can talk about it, we can agree to disagree, we can acknowledge yet not be able to accept, and just be able to walk around it, talk about it. And despite sometimes the difference of opinion, the difference of narrative, that perspective, being quite averse to how we look at the world, and we're very invested in as meaning-making creatures. Now, if I've spent the last 30 years or 40 years or 50 years of my life looking at the world in a certain way, then here comes someone who's challenging that. That's pretty much my life's work that's being challenged, and I'm not going to take well to that. Whereas someone who probably a 10-year-old or 20-year-old who's coming along, who's equally proud of their way of looking at the world, coming face to face with me, challenging me, that's not going to go too well with them if I'm trying to breathe down that change in them, or they're trying to breathe down the change in me. Whereas if we stopped trying to make that happen, which is, I'm not trying to change you and you're not trying to change me, whereas we're just trying to understand, we're just trying to talk what makes you who you are. Sometimes very magically that change somehow happens. People start seeing things differently. People start responding to each other in different ways. And I'm imagining that that's the wonderful way that by holding space for that conflict, by continuing to engage in it, by continuing to talk about it, sometimes something new emerges from it. So I believe that it's also about, when we're especially talking about kids, in giving them that safe space to fail, in giving them a safe container to work within, where just like Yasser was saying, that we don't, unconditional doesn't mean that everything goes. If a toddler wants to put their fingers into an electric socket, we can't let that happen. We know as an adult that that's bad for them. However, then we also need to know, which is that how far are we protecting someone, and if we are always going to be that external monitor onto someone, where we need to always be inspiring that change, always be protecting them, always be guiding them, always being that source of wisdom in their life, then how will that organism ever be able to launch into their environment and be able to do the same? So it's somewhere where we're saying that we're also trying to do that emotional mentoring for them, where we are trying to edge towards values which we ideally would like them to have, but then we're also recognizing that they're going to do it in their own time, in their own way, and they're going to be creative. We all might sort of know that we bear our own unique thumbprints, and we are all different from each other. A set of parents can produce, I don't know the number, but 70,000 different kids. But then they're also recognizing that each of these kids are going to get into the world, look at the world in a very unique way. Something like this kid that we're trying to challenge and steer in a certain direction, something like this kid has never been produced in the history of this planet. They don't come with a manual, they don't come with how we can guide them. So our best bet, as at least in my mind, as a therapist, as an educator, as a parent, is to stick around with that process, knowing that I'm well intentioned. I know where I'd like to take a person, but they need to get there on their own if they want to. And hopefully, in their recognizing my investment into them, they might want to go in along that same direction. And if they don't, human beings don't always get along, and that's fine. And still, we'd like to be in a relationship with them, saying, well, hey, you and I are still going to be together. We're disagreeing here. We don't see eye to eye, but let's agree to disagree, and maybe let's break bread. Let's go out for a walk. Let's still trek. We might not agree on how many hours of your doing something is good or bad, but all right, well, how about we spend 2 hours going on the camping trip, or let's try to have some ritual of connection with each other. Some things might have changed from my parents' generation, where we used to sit together on the dinner table and doing something, and my kid doesn't want to do that. So, well, what do they want to do? Can we still have some ritual of affection and some ritual of connection that makes sense to them? And maybe they walk halfway, I walk halfway, and somewhere in between, we might still find what we're all looking for, that sense of connection and that relatedness that makes us very uniquely human.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to bring you in to round us off before we go to the audience who have some questions. But this is just an incredibly rich conversation. I may have to watch the recording of this afterwards as well. Sarah.
There's been lots of information to process. I think for me is just thinking about our audience, and maybe I can help guide this a little bit to give them some nuggets to be able to answer some of the questions. So yeah, we've talked about a lot about how do we make this change. I think we can understand that from knowledge of neuroscience and the research that is out there, that there's a wealth of research that talks about children. So if we understand how the brain is developed, it's developed from the bottom to the top, middle to out. And that's what I talked about before. It's sequenced and organized in that way. So when we look and understand children in the classroom or at home, when we see those anxious, unpredictable, hypervigilant behaviors, which could be challenging behavior, or children being very distressed or quiet, it could be a ritual of different types of behavior. We need to try and understand that is where the lower brain is operating, and children are existing in a very stressful environment. We've had COVID, we've had some of the things that are going on that I've been talking about in the panel. We can't get away from that. The research stats tell us that. I think in the UK alone, 1 in 6 children have a diagnosable mental health problem. So we have to address that as caring, predictable, unconditional adults in these children's lives, and that works with the transgenerational gap. Children, I want people who are listening in to think about the children that you work with or care for, or who are indeed your children. Anxiety is held within the body. You will see it held within their body. And we were talking about before, you have the mind and the body, and they are connected. Now, in talking therapies, a lot of the time we just work with people's cognitions. We do this talking, and actually that requires children to do the higher brain operative. But if children are in an anxious state, that higher brain has shut down because the lower brain becomes dominant, because that's the part of their brain that is operating because they're trying to survive that moment or that interaction or that learning environment. So we, as caring adults, as teachers, as parents, we need to get children into that regulatory state of calm. And we do that through positive relationships, unconditional positive regard, safe, predictable, nurturing environments, but also through regulation. And how do we regulate? We know ourselves. We do that through movement. We do that through repetitive, rhythmic, regulatory movement. And actually that is part of what Calm Brain is developed by. So we'll think about us as adults. We'll tap our leg. We're regulating. We might go for a walk. We're regulating. We might go to the gym. We're regulating. We might go for a swim. Those are all regulatory activities, and we need to bring that into the classroom. We need to bring that back into the home environment. How do we connect? Think about early experiences with a child. If a baby's distressed, what do? We co-regulate. We rock, we soothe, we comfort, and we have got to think as a society, how can we bring those early primitive experiences which help children's brains develop into our environments with children today? And I think that, I hope, is more helpful in terms of thinking practically how we do that.
I think that you've all said some quite remarkable things about how human beings work with and relate to each other. And Sarah, you just got a very small round of applause from Faria in what you've just been saying. I think you come from remarkably different perspectives, but it's very important that we all understand that we're aiming the same direction. Um, I think the first question about the generation gap and about relationships has actually been answered in what you've just said between you. But there's another audience question, which says, when there is conflict, how can we make a compromise acceptable to both sides? We haven't got much time, so I'm going to give you a sentence each. So, Faria, do you want to address this, please?
I think sometimes if the conflict is beyond words, it helps to just change roles. What would you do if you were in my place? What would you think about the same situation if you were sitting here? I think that helps. I do that even in my clinical practice. When I find that the client is not really accommodating any suggestions or alternative thinking, I say, how about if you become the therapist for a moment and I'm the client? What would you say to me? It's funny how perspectives change completely. I think that helps. And of course, calming. I agree with Sarah so much, but how do you calm somebody when they're already so threatened, they're all heated up, ready to fight the enemy? Time, space. And of course, sharing experiences. I think the intergenerational gap, if children had more time, and if this involvement on the internet was restricted, they would have more activities with their families. I mean, I remember going for picnics with my parents. I don't know of any young people who do that. I think Yasser will probably agree with me on that helps when you do outings together. In fact, the same conflict, when addressed in a different situation, would be resolved better. I
Thank
keep it
you.
brief because I think there's
We,
little
we,
time.
we have questions coming in fairly thick and fast now. I'm going to try and conflate two, the pandemic effect, but also when you're actually at the point where your child says, you just don't understand me. Has the pandemic worsened that, made it better because people have spent more time together? Where are we at with trying to speak each other's language, trying to be together? Yes, there, I'm going to bring you in because you're the one with teenagers. You're mute. You're mute.
Apologies, I was on mute. I have been facing this challenge, I have to say that, every now and then. A couple of things that I've done as a parent. First of all, allow me to repeat what I said earlier as well, that all those parents out there, let me bust the myth that parenthood is not natural. At least that's what I have learned. Having children in this age group, which is the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha, there are certain interventions that we as parents need to do to equip ourselves and validate our parenting approach and revisit that. That's number one. Number two, when you have this conflict, I would like also our teenagers to also take that responsibility to have that dialogue. It's very easy to be in the state of mind where I'm telling myself that things are happening to me. Everybody's against me. Nobody's listening to me, etc., etc. Or I could be in a frame of mind that things are happening for me. And just by going in that space, it just changes your neurology of how you approach certain things. I think, repeat what Dr. Paracha already mentioned. Nothing beats the importance of having the dialogue. What I'm offering on the table to my children is, again, that unconditional love, where they can come and talk to me about literally anything and everything. I do understand that my child is going through a lot of exploration in their teenage, the puberty, the sex education, and all that. And I want to give that safe haven to have those difficult conversations with my child. It's better that they learn this in a well-managed environment than the world out there, where the exploration can also go a little bit off track, if you like. Communication is the key to this. And how that can work is also to have that me time, uninterrupted time with media, TV around us. Like, for example, one of the things that we try consciously as a family is to have at least one meal together without having our devices around us. So again, communication.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make answering the next question the final one, because we are almost 5 minutes from the end. Omar, people are asking questions about how schools, together with parents, can help teenagers to face the challenge of what the social media world throws at them. And we have a final strand to that, which is where you've got a home that is actually multilingual and maybe multicultural. How does that? How do you approach those things? And I know you live in Australia, where there are many, many cultural groups. So, do you want to have a go at that?
Sure. Let me respond to the challenges of social media. I think that in the last 10 years, the impact of the social media is we're just beginning to understand how this is affecting social relationships, the impact of anxiety. If you watch the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, that details a lot of these preliminary understanding we have of how this is changing, not only our relationships, but teenagers' mental health. And then over that, we also have an understanding of that adolescent mind, that the adolescent mind to start with is somewhat reactive. It is somewhat more resistant to authority. It is very hyper rational, and that produces a lot of difficult effects for decision makers, teachers, authority figures, legislators. And I think it's just about bringing those diverse, rich conversations where we're saying, here's what we know about how the world exists. What are some creative ways to move forward? And I think that a very important part of the conversation is also eliciting the young people as our supports and allies, rather than looking at them as the enemies or people we need to change, or people who are the bad guys, and we're saying, okay, we disagree with how you're doing it, and we want to do without how you see the world. That just produces further reactions. So my approach to any change is going to be that very gentle, graded process where we have an understanding that these young guys, they have another 10 years till both their body and mind is going to be somewhat more grounded, where it's not going to be as reactive as it is today. Until then, how can we keep them safe? How can we give them a safe place to play with, where, for example, if there are certain things that we as parents, as schools, are not okay with, going over the social media. Like a couple of years ago, you might remember that there were these chat rooms where people were writing a lot of their secrets about their friends, or they were writing things about their school teachers. And that was extremely disruptive, because people were saying things which could not be ascertained yet. They gathered a lot of importance, and that's all that was being talked about, till schools had to put their foot down on that and say, well, hey, this is not acceptable. If you are going to be a part of certain groups, then this is very problematic. And it was bringing all of the stakeholders together and saying, here's why this is a problem. We need to figure out a solution. What can be some alternative channels where, if you need to air some grievances, how can we do that? So if the meaning that a young person is deriving from a social media platform is either for connectivity, or they're for they're expressing their opinion, or that's for intimacy, then the question for us is that how else are we providing that? Just sort of putting it down or saying we disagree with that doesn't give them an expression of that need. So needs are always good. The problem is how that need is going to be fulfilled. And if we're saying this is not a way to do that, then how else are we going to provide for that need?
Folks, I'm really sorry to. Oh, I could talk to you all day. I hope the audience has found this as rich as I have, but you will be amazed to hear that we are less than 2 minutes from the end of our time together. I'm going to try to sum up where I think we are. This is about listening. This is about openness. This is about saying, this far you can go, but actually no further. Are you safe? Are you dignified? Are you ready to face the world? Are you ready to grow into being an adult? And that's a joint endeavour between home and school and the child. And making that calm and being prepared to step into spaces where children may feel that they aren't safe and neither are you, but together you can hold this and come to a better place, is an all day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week process for parents, for children, and for schools. It has been an honour to moderate this session. I can't tell you how much I feel I've learned in the last hour. We could have spent a great deal more time together, but very sadly, now is our moment to do what we all do on Teams and other platforms, which is to wave goodbye and to say thank you very much to everybody, to Beacon House for making this platform possible, and to those who've joined us in this session. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and
Thank
goodbye.
you, Maggie. Thank you for
Thank you so
supervising us
much.
all very well. Thank you. Bye-bye.